What is up, fam? Welcome to SkillTree, where we learn how to do just about everything. All right, so today I'm gonna be covering a thing that has been requested quite a bit, actually. And with my last video, the wizard hat here, there has been a serious uptick in requests for a hooded cloak. But because I can't just do a simple version of anything, I've decided to make this cloak the perfect intersection between nerdiness and just straight up badass. As such, I will be making an assassin's cloak. What is an assassin's cloak? It is a cloak an assassin wears. Obviously, I'm talking blend into the shadows, hidden weapons, whole 9 yards. So enough of me yammering on, let's just jump right into it and level up this skill. All right, so for starters, I'm gonna see how long I need to make this sucker. Now, if you look at things like Lord of the Rings or whatnot, the cloak doesn't go all the way down to the floor. It actually goes kind of mid-calf. That to me seems way more useful. Like if you're running from orcs or if you're fighting, you don't want this thing tripping you up, right? So I think I'm gonna go for that mid-calf length. Measuring from collarbone-ish down to where I want it. Looks like I'm going for an even 50 inches. Now, because of how it sits in the back and I'm gonna be like folding up the ends to make the seam look nice and all that, I'm gonna add an additional 6 inches to it, bringing me to a grand total of 56 inches for the whole thing. For the outer shell of this cloak, I got this felt wool material. It comes 64 inches wide and I got it cut 6 yards long. I probably don't need all that material, but I don't want to screw up and not have enough, so 6 yards is what I got. I also got 6 yards of this fleece material for the inside. It's really thin, it looks like it'll be super comfortable. I mostly got it because it was on sale for like $2 a yard. I definitely don't need 6 yards of this, but I'll find a use for it. So this being 64 inches wide, I know that way is gonna be long enough to get past the 56 inches that I wanted for my overall length. Next, I need to cut the material 2 times that in length. So 56 times 2, 112 inches in length I need to cut. My table is way too small for all of this. Okay, here we go. Now we need to cut this into a semicircle. To do this, we want that 112 long piece to be folded in half back to the 56 inches that we're working with. All right, now we want to fold the blanket in half lengthwise. So this is the 56 inches right here. Now we bring the open-ended corner diagonally over to the folded corner and smooth it out. Now we have this triangle that we formed here. Pulling from the tip here, I use my tape to draw an arc at my 56 inch length. I do the same at the 5 inch mark to form my neck hole. Then I just carefully cut along my lines. The finished result forms a perfect half circle. As a shortcut, I use the wool as a template to cut out the lining fabric as well. Then I pin them together along their edges to keep everything in place. All right, now that that's all pinned up, it's time to sew everything together. We're just gonna sew along the sides and we're gonna leave the neckline and the very bottom of it open. Cool, now that this is all sewed up, I feel like on camera this is real dark. Hold on, 1 second. All right, we sewed up everything except for the very, very bottom and the neckline. The neckline we're gonna use to attach the hood, and the bottom I'm not gonna sew just because I don't wanna see a seam on the other side. Now what we need to do though is reach inside of that open bottom area and we're gonna turn the whole thing inside out. That's gonna hide our seam and make everything look really clean. What? That looks professional. That looks so good. So one thing that really helped to keep these seams super straight is on the actual sewing machine itself, there's a bunch of lines that are right next to the needle. Each one of those represents like 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch and all that. If you just keep your edge lined up with one of those lines, the seam comes out super straight. It's actually really easy to do. I did not know that before doing this, and it made everything so much easier. Before I was all over the freaking place just trying to do it by eye. It's the little things we do while leveling up these skills. Makes a big difference. Now we're gonna iron those seams we just made to make sure everything lays down nice and flat. Now that that cloak bit is all done, we can get started on the hood. Since we have everything all sewn together, we can see exactly how long the neckline is. Now we need to take the hood height measurement. To do that, just take like a tape or a string or something and loop it around to the looseness you want your hood to be. Like how much space do you want your hood? I like mine to be real billowy, so 40 inches seems like it'll have nice room here. So what you do is then you take that number, you cut it in half, so for me it'll be 20 inches, and that'll be the height of the hood. All right, so this is what we're gonna do. We have our neckline here at 19 inches, and then we have our hood height that we just got at 20 inches. So we're just gonna come straight back And then whatever we want the hood to look like, the back of the hood, we're just gonna cut that into the fabric as well. This right here can be any shape you want it to be. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna divide this bottom measurement here in half and then add an inch to allow for the seam. We're gonna have our fabric folded in half so that the top here becomes the hood so we don't have to sew a seam for the very top of the hood. Now I'm gonna measure down the 20 inches of my hood length and make a mark. Then my 19 inches cut in half, which would be 9.5 inches, plus the additional inch for seam allowance. I measure that up at the top as well and make a mark. At this top mark is where I'm gonna start the bow of my hood. From here, you could either make a point or really any shape you want for the back. I'm gonna make it kind of bow out and then come back in. So like my face will be here, my head will sit in here, and then I'll have this excess material just kind of hanging in the background. Once you've got the hood shape drawn in how you want it, it's time to cut it out. Now use that shape you just cut as a template to mark out your lining material. And carefully cut it out too. All right, now we need to sew up the back of our hood on both the outer shell and the inner lining. So check it out, you have the outer portion and the inner portion. Now we have to combine them together. But we wanna do this so that it hides these seams. So in order to do that, have them facing each other like so. And now we're gonna pin the fronts of them together like this. Flip one side. Now grab a side of the inner and line it up with that flipped side. Now start pinning them together. Keep following it all the way around until everything's all pinned up. Once it's all in place, sew those seams together, making sure you leave the neckline open. So once those faces are all sewed up, all we're gonna do is turn the whole thing inside out, like so. So when you go to turn it inside out, you take this seam and you turn it into this seam. Look at how clean that looks. Then just push the lining inside the hood. And boom, that is a lined hood. Check that out. Now, just like with the rest of the cloak, we want to iron this seam flat. We have a cloak, we have a hood. Now let's just stick these bad boys together. Start by pinching the wool fabric together like so. Then pin them in place. Finally, I run them through the sewing machine just to make the connection permanent. All right, now we need to sew up this inner lining, and I want to do it in such a way that this stitch is hidden. So I start by folding 1/4 inch of material over itself on both sides and pinching them together. And I recommend pinning them in place like that just to make the whole process easier. Now push your needle in at the top of one of those folds and immediately back out along the same fold. Next, insert the needle directly across from where the last stitch just exited, and do the same thing, bring that needle right back out again along that same fold. Now just continue this pattern a few times. You're gonna be left with a stitch that looks kind of like the rungs of a ladder. When you pull on the thread and everything gets tight, the stitching is covered up by those folds and is hidden inside of the seam. This is called a ladder stitch in case you wanted to look it up in further detail. Just continue along until you reach the end. Then tie off the last stitch and hide the thread by passing it through the material and back out at some random spot. Then just cut it close to the fabric, leaving a nice tidy seam without a stitch in sight. All right, with our hood in place, we need to find a way to keep this whole thing closed. Now, I've decided to use this hoop and toggle I made a long time ago for another project I did, but you can use anything from like a lace pattern that ties together to one of those cool little brooch pin things, whatever floats your boat. First, I punched some holes in this thing so I could sew it to the piece. Then, to keep up with my assassin theme, I dyed the pieces a UMC black. Making sure I lined them up exactly where I wanted them, I locked the toggle and loop in place with some waxed thread. Check it out. Take it, toggle it in place. What? Check that out. I have a cape. I love how big the hood is. Just like get lost in this thing. Guys, it is freezing in my basement, so I'm kind of digging this right now. All right, so now that we have our badass cloak made, it's time to add all the goodies that make it an assassin's cloak. In particular, I'm gonna add some hidden throwing knives into this sucker. Let's get to it. Now my stealthy weapons of choice are these beautiful throwers made by Kershaw. My everyday carry is a Kershaw knife and I love it. It's just with me everywhere I go. So not only do I like the quality of their knives, but look at these knives. Let's just say they totally match the stealth assassin theme I'm going for. With those decided on, it's time to roll out the leather. That's right, this is a leather crafting episode 2. First, I line up my knives and mark out my desired shape. I cut 2 of these out to form a front and a back. Then using a stitching groover, I carve out where I want my stitches to lay. This tool just makes a groove in the leather so that your stitches don't stick out past the top of your leather. Next, I use this 4-pronged hole puncher to lay down my thread holes. Then use a saddle stitch to connect the 2 pieces together. Be sure to check out my Plague Doctor video here if you want like an in-depth tutorial on how to do a saddle stitch. With all that done, I'm left with a little pocket for my knives to live in. Now I can't have the knives just jingling around in a pocket while I'm on a stealth mission. So I'm gonna wet form this leather in order to make this more custom fit to these knives. To do this, I just submerge the leather in hot, not boiling water. You're gonna see little air bubbles rising out. Once they stop, it's time to take the leather out of the water and dry it off with a towel. Then I put the knives where I want them and proceed to firmly press the leather around them to form it into shape. Once satisfied, I stick them in an oven at 175 degrees for 45 minutes. So leather has a whole bunch of air pockets inside of it. When you put it in the hot water and you see all those bubbles coming out, that's that air leaving. By pressing it into shape afterwards, you close up any of those gaps that were left behind. Then when you expose it to the heat of the oven, the leather dries into that shape minus those gaps, leaving a more rugged, hardened piece of leather. All right, now that our holster is all hardened, I've got to figure out a way to attach it to the cloak. So what I'm envisioning in my head is when the cloak is all closed up, the knives will be hidden but still within easy reach. And then if I want to open the cloak up and have it kind of draped over my shoulder, these will be sitting kind of right here so you can just see the tops of them. Like a gunfighter when he opens his duster jacket, you know what I mean? And I think I've come up with a way to do it. I'm going to attach these little grommets to a few points on the holster. I will also attach said grommets to the cloak itself. Then I can just go ahead and tie this in place when I want to use it, or if I'm not trying to assassinate a target or just visiting a reno fair, I can go ahead and take this right out and leave them home. Now, in order for the grommets to not tear out the fabric of the cloak, I'm going to go ahead and back it with another piece of leather. As an added bonus, I think these little grommets are going to close up the top of this holster a little bit more, making the knives even more snug. This way I can parkour all across building tops as I escape my nemesis and trust that my knives aren't going to fall out. So first things first, I punch my holes where I want them and set the grommets into place. Using the recommended striker and anvil, I lock said grommets into place. The grommets actually look really cool and do a great job locking everything in place. With those all set, I dye the whole thing black. Look how slick that looks. That is the throwing knife case of a master assassin. All right, next I figure out my positioning and lay everything out where I want it. Using my hole punch, I punch straight through the fabric and the leather underneath. Then go about setting my grommets into place. With all of those set, I finish up my build by tying my hidden holster into place with some black paracord. Alright fam, every once in a while I make a thing that is both like super nerdy and super badass. And that is this thing. One, I mean, yeah, it's Cloak. Like, check it out, right? It's got an awesome hood, all that jazz. But then, check it out. Oh, a knife. Oh, another knife. It's like a magic trick, just pulling them out of nowhere. Put them back into place. And they're gone. And this thing moves around like they're not even part of it. Can't even tell it's there. You know, you're just kind of chilling out and boom, a knife. Another knife. So cool. Let's say I'm being a little bit more out in the open with my murdering, right? Check this out. Put it over here. It looks like you're a gunslinger. They're just there at my hip. Check it. Oh, right there, right out in the open. And it's super simple. I mean, it's just tied in place. You can take it back out if you want to. Again, you're going to like a reno fair or something like that, and you don't want to have actual knives with you. You just untie it, it's fine. Or you make little pockets for a bunch of other stuff and you tie those on instead. You're here, you got peace hands. Somebody attacks you. You move out of the way, knife. So good. It works great. Even through its paces, a bunch of movement and stuff, the knives, they don't come out until you grab and you pull. This is an extremely satisfying build. All right, I'll stop nerding out now. I like this thing. So I'm sure you can tell I am super in love with this build. It's comfortable, it's warm, and super badass with my hidden knife holster here. Look at that. If you like this build, why don't you hit me with some of that thumbs up love, and do not forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. Also, a special thank you for everyone who requested this build and everyone who requests builds in general. It really helps me come up with those ideas, and I like making things that I know you want to see. So as always, if you have a skill request, why don't you leave it down in the comments and I will add it to the list. All right, well, I should get going. Night is fast approaching and there are some dark deeds that need doing. In the meantime, keep leveling up, you.